Well, good morning. Welcome to today's Community Chest webinar. And I'm delighted that I'm going to be in conversation today with Professor Michael Mainelli, Chairman of ZN Group, and who's just finished his term as the 695th Lord Mayor of London. I'm Mike Wardle. I'm the Chief Executive at ZN, and I'm your moderator for today. The agenda is quite simple. Really to focus on Michael and his time as the Lord Mayor, and one of his themes of the mayoral year as to the City of London, the world's coffee house, and we'll come through that. We'll want to have some kind of conversation about what advice Michael might have for the city and to other cities. And there'll be time for questions, comment, and answers. If you haven't used GoToWebinar before, the way to put in an observation or ask a question is to find the questions tab on the dashboard on your screen, type in your question, that'll come to us, and you can do that at any point during the session. So if you have a really bright thought, do capture it by putting a question into the system. We are recording the session today, so if you miss anything or if you think it is so wonderful that you want to tell your friends and family about it, the recording will be available in about 24 hours on the website. Do go back and rewatch if there are pearls of wisdom that you can't find anywhere else online. So just a very brief word about Michael. First of all, you'll notice that I'm not wearing a tie. Michael is wearing a tie. There's a reason for that. We'll come to that later in the session. But what can I say about Michael? This is a very, very short CV. Michael is a scientist and economist at heart, and trying to promote societal advance through better finance and technology has been a lifetime's work so far. And I think the unique position that Michael's in, having come to an end of his time as Lord Mayor, is to reflect on being Lord Mayor, on being Sheriff of London, taking on very important roles, promoting the city and running the city, and some reflections on what he's learned and what he managed to achieve during his time. So, Michael, over to you, I think, for your reflections, first of all, on what is the City of London? What's it all about?
Oh, great. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to the team at Zien. For those of you who aren't aware, the team at Zien have given me effectively 4.5 years off to work for the city for free, and I really appreciate it. I don't know about pearls of wisdom, but I hope to share with you a little bit of what I've learned today. So we got involved with the City of London back in the 1980s, actually, and that was to do with climate change and the evolution, effectively, of the carbon markets, which many people don't realize that the City of London began principally in the mid-90s, and in 1997 concluded at COP3, the use of emissions trading schemes. In fact, the City of London passed the first Clean Air Act in the world in 1953, so it has pedigree here. And that's how I got involved. And somebody sat me down in the 80s when I had a vote in the city and said, hey, Sonny, there are three things about the city: the Corporation of London, the wards, and the livery companies. And I took that to heart. I actually pursued more of a ward route, being somebody who had worked in Broad Street Ward, just between Bank and Liverpool Street, since the 1980s, became chairman of the Ward Club, and worked with the city in its capacity as the world's oldest democratic workers and residents cooperative, which it actually is. It's been holding continuous elections since the 7th century. What makes a city unusual is that we still retain a structure where workers have the vote. And in fact, workers have the preponderance of the vote. We'll come to that, I suspect, in a moment in one of the other slides. So that was how I got involved. And it made me look at what the city truly is when you examine it at the level of the workers. And so this slide is looking here, sort of the inner circle is close to the traditional boundary of the city, which is the old Roman walls. The city itself is 1.12 square miles. It's not exactly square, it's a bit more oblong, and it's not exactly a square mile, but it's darn close. And what you see here are 40 learned societies, 70 institutions of higher education, and 130 research institutes. The learned societies in blue, many of them actually began in the city and moved west a bit. The 70 institutions of higher education are there in the red, and the purple is the 130 research institutes. So the City of London is very clearly a financial services center, but it is also a center of science and technology. It's also a center of education and media. And it's that confluence that I think defines it. There are some arguments about how much of GDP it produces, but it has about 2% of the working population in the United Kingdom and arguably produces somewhere between 7 and 9% of GDP. So it was that sort of look at what the city was that began me thinking about how we misrepresent it quite frequently as solely a financial center and therefore miss its great strength, which is its multidisciplinary approach to problem solving.
And I mean, you carry this forward, I guess, in the themes that you took into the mayoralty, both as the city as a solutions centre and connect to prosper, and certainly on solutions. I think you thought this was a really key fact for the City of London.
I did because Mike, what you'll remember because you helped me with this 3 years ago. But when we sat down and had a look at it, the issue was really solving what for whom. Now I took a slightly different approach here. To me, the city's client is modestly the world. So just a tiny little client. And for those of us who've worked in professional services, if you can get your client to define the problem, then you've probably got the sale if you know how to do it. And so selling London in this sense, because what a Lord Mayor is doing is really three things: commerce, community, and charity. And the bits there, about 70% of it, just under, and we do keep timesheets, is the commerce bit, actually developing the city. About 15% is keeping the community together, the various livery companies, the 111, the various charities, the ecclesiastical area, the military, and about another 15% is charity work itself, fundraising and things of that nature. So the bulk of the job is trying to get out there and promote the city. And so I started with that notion that we have this workforce, which at the time that I took office was 615,000. And a couple of other facts there that are kind of interesting. The first is that at the time of Brexit, we had approximately, at the time of Brexit, we had approximately 525,000 workers. And we're pretty close on these. These aren't gross statistics or sampling. These are actually looking at payrolls because the workers have the vote. So the city cares very clearly about it in the way that cities did up until the time of Napoleon. It was the workers who dominated. And that was the number, 525,000. And we had about 11% of global assets under management. At the time I took office, we had 615,000 and 13% of global assets under management. So a net increase of 90,000. So the city has actually been an extraordinarily strong place providing those solutions. But what does the client want? And I thought to myself that 10 years ago, the client, the world, sat down and knocked out these 17 sustainable development goals. And so I thought, why don't we show the world that we can do something about each one of them?
Thanks. And you chose as one of your themes for the year, Connect to Prosper. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see the list of initiatives that Michael kicked off during his time as Lord Mayor and has brought forward and brought to fruition. I don't think we've got time to go through all of them, but maybe we'll come back in the Q&A. But Michael, what does Connect to Prosper mean to you, I guess?
Well, Connect to Prosper to me was a recognition that Londoners are no smarter or dumber than anybody else in the world, but we are typically better connected. We're better connected, as I mentioned earlier, on multidisciplinarism. We're better connected multiculturally. If you look at my personal background, everybody with my accent in English, takes me to be very American, and I am. But I do have an Italian father, an Irish mother, 4 passports, a German wife, a son and grandsons living in Japan, a daughter in the Netherlands. I'm connected. Most people in London are hyper connected. And it's those connections with a bit of brain power and multidisciplinary attitude that I think makes the difference. So I wanted to tackle some big issues alongside the SDGs or along with the SDGs. The first was ethical AI, obviously a topical issue, although we began this project before ChatGPT was a big issue in November 2 years ago. We began it about June the year before. But what we did here was to emphasize the use of ISO 42001 under the ISO regulatory system as opposed to a plethora of local regulation. On space protection, One of the big issues is space, and I know we've had some webinars on that. But space junk is a rising problem, and for those of us who care about climate change and all the other SDGs, the UN actually said 10 years ago, quite rightly, that without space we cannot meet 40% of the SDGs. We need it for GPS, Earth monitoring, telematics, etc. Smart Economies Networks was to try and bind people together economically and commercially by tackling that plethora of paperwork, working in particular with the Nordics, where they have a system called X-Road. A lot about that. We had a constructing science initiative, helping people develop a standard to move from offices to labs. That's now actually become the standard for moving from offices to labs to help deal not just with the void space that property owners have around the world, let alone London, but also, of course, to ensure that buildings weren't being torn down needlessly. Galanos was an idea that was cooked up by MQ Mental Health with me, and it's now a project running at Oxford University. It was a bit of a concocted name, the Global Alliance for Living Evidence on Anxiety, Depression, and Psychosis, but it's now operating in 70 countries under the great leadership of Professor Andrea Cipriani. And what they're trying to do there is to speed up and improve the quality of mental health research through a preprint and ontology service. And finally, and you'll notice there's no 695 here, all Lord Mayors have been very, very active in the sustainability area since I've known them. As I mentioned earlier, it was in the mid 90s we were working on this with the corporation. And here we did a number of things, for example, promoting sovereign sustainability linked bonds, promoting the use of insurance in the voluntary carbon markets. And we launched something called the City Carbon Credits Cancellation Service, allowing people to buy as little as a kilogram, which is, by the way, a few pennies on the main markets and actually have them canceled. So these were the big 6 projects that I'm afraid my team had to put up with me kind of just going through that list all the time. And we began with a lecture at Gresham College, there on the bottom right, that set things off. And then we had this wonderful logo. So it was a short, sharp, hard 1 year of marketing, ably assisted, I might add, as I took office last year by the 75 staff at the Mansion House. And in particular, I worked hand in hand, not just with the people at Zien, but also with the people there. And I particularly single out for credit Catherine Rooney and Caroline Jack, who were enormously helpful in getting that going.
Thanks very much. And just on the next slide, we kind of see the map of the initiatives you put in place. As you were coming into office, you had this sort of this grand plan, I guess. And what led you to sort of want to put these themes together, I guess?
Well, it was a combination of wanting to make an impact, and I wanted to leave people. I guess if you look at this, by the way, is exactly, this hasn't altered since last October. This was the plan, and I feel very much that we acted against that plan very strongly, which I've never been one to be. Anybody who knows me knows I'm pretty flexible, so I was a bit surprised in doing my summing up last month that actually we'd done everything, but it was an immense opportunity to take a plan, make it, and then execute it for a year with an enormous amount of support from thousands of people, literally. Um, what was exciting to me though was I wanted to leave, if anything, and there's only so much you can do, just move the dial just a tiny bit on people's perception of the City of London and London itself around the world. And to do that, I wanted to leave them with the idea that we are, what I said earlier, the world's oldest continuous democratic workers' residence cooperative, because it's very difficult to describe the city. If you go to this corporation's website, it says the governing body of the square mile. What's a governing body? But we actually really are a workers' and residents cooperative. And in that, I wanted to emphasize the point that the city's strategy for a millennia or more is very much the idea that you create prosperity. That's it, create wealth. You've got to get business going. That's the commerce bit. But then you want to invest that in improving the environment, the business environment, and the physical environment. So that's improving regulation, the way the city works, making sure there's a good rule of law, and then the physical environment as well. And then finally, you need to share that prosperity. And that's what a cooperative should be doing. And I wanted to leave that in people's minds. The second thing I wanted to do was to emphasize these pillars of, yes, definitely, just over well, just over a third of our jobs, so 225,000, are in finance and professional services, but another third are in science and technology, and another third is in education, arts, media, and culture. And I wanted people to realize that that is the real city. And it's been quite fun, as I've been going around this year. People are going, I didn't realize there was a laboratory there. There's a research institute there. You see what you want to see. Although, let's be frank, if you go to Bank Station at the heart of the city, what you see is a lot of banks. And you see the Bank of England and the Royal Exchange and Mansion House. So you would come away with that impression. But if you look just that tiny bit deeper, you begin to realize the huge richness of the city.
Thanks very much. And worth going through, I think, some of the individual initiatives that we took forward. And the first one I want to talk about is Knowledge Miles. I'm very proud of this, as well as Michael being proud of it. This was Michael's idea to put together a series of online lectures during the mayoral year. And when Michael started, we said, well, how many should we do? Maybe one a week. He said, no, two a week. I said, okay, 100 lectures. We got to 103 during the mayoral year, which I was very pleased about. And this was with the support of the Gresham Society, and Tim Connell there deserves a shout out for doing a lot of work to make the lectures a success. The team at ZN, who worked really hard to get such an interesting group of speakers to take part, and to the livery companies, who a lot of whom sponsored and provided speakers for events. But Michael, your reflections on Knowledge Miles, perhaps?
Well, just an outrageous success, and the thanks as well. The breadth, though, constantly came across as Lord Mayor. People would come up to me and say, I was watching this Knowledge Miles series, and I was stunned at the breadth of intellect and interest in the city. And that was really what we were trying to show. And just a shout out to people online today. All 103 remain online. They are recorded, as is this session. And it's a really good, fun series to browse, particularly over Christmas. So we have to move on to the next area.
Yeah. And so next there was the coffee colloquies. These were events held at Mansion House. But tell me what you were trying to do and what you think you achieved.
Well, as the Knowledge Miles were making connections online, and those are outrageously fantastic numbers, we wanted to do the same thing physically. And I had a format in mind, which we've used at ZN over the years from time to time at physical events. And I had a couple of trials. And the colloquy event style, there are a couple of similar type approaches like this, but the idea is short presentations, not that kind of death by PowerPoint. So we really had people come in and broadly they would, when we could hold it together, once in a while we blew it, but most of the time, 10 presentations of 4 minutes each. So that was 40 minutes plus 5 minutes of intro and outro, 45 minutes of Q&A, that gets you to 90 minutes, and then 30 minutes, and then 30 minutes of networking. We didn't quite, this was the original slide, 40, 15, and 45 networking. We never quite made that, but we did get 30 minutes of networking. And so we processed something like, I think it was 2,500 people came in and made huge numbers of physical connections, very, very successful. And that lined up nicely against the Sustainable Development Goals. We had a couple of other subjects as well that I wanted to tackle. So AI, space, and other things came on to the agenda. But we did all 17. And probably the most interesting one was the last one, Partnership for the Goals, number 17. Because I was sort of, what are we going to talk about? You're going to get everybody in a room and they're all going to go, yeah, we ought to be partners. Great. Well, that's a pretty boring session. So we decided what we do is we do disagreeing agreeably. What could we learn from people of faith about how to disagree agreeably? Because people in the faith community do a lot of work together. And there's no way I'm converting you to my faith or you to me to yours. But we, on the other hand, do want to work together. And in that session, quite interestingly, we found a unity amongst creativity, science and technology, and faith. And that is, in my opinion, doubt. Kierkegaard says you can't have faith without doubt. Science is all about doubt. In fact, anything is only provisional. And finally, of course, creativity is I doubt what I've done is the best I can do. I could do better. So that turned out to be kind of the most fascinating area of all. And I still remember the great joke that came out of it, which was there are two people of faith on a train, a priest and a rabbi, and they get to the end of this journey, and they become fast friends along the way. And finally, as the priest gets off, he says to the rabbi, "Well, I can see that you worship God in your way. I worship God in His way," and off they go. Uh, but it was a really a moving experience that, and for that I must thank my chaplain, of course, Alan McCormick, and also our dear friend Saeed Razawi, the imam. So it turned out to be a fantastic event.
Thank you very much. We're going to go through quite quickly sort of a series of other things that were associated. First of all, charity, an important part of the city's role. What was the highlight, I guess, of the charitable part of your year?
Well, this slide looks as if all we're doing is partying, and it's somewhat the way the charity stuff is quite fun, but there's a serious purpose to it. So the Lord Mayor's Appeal is the core charity for the Lord Mayor, and I had a few other ancillary elements. What you're seeing there is Elizabeth and I abseiling down the cheese grater at Leadenhall. That was an extraordinarily rain-soaked ride around the city. Bottom left was our grand finale, night at the musicals evening, and on the bottom right, I had also picked up with the 350th anniversary of the Royal Mathematical Society at Christ's Hospital, trying to raise bursaries there. People always ask about the amounts, and the amounts are good, but it's also about bringing people together at the same time. So the Lord Mayor's Appeal is getting on up around the 2 million mark. We managed to raise £900,000 for the Royal Medical School bursary, and we raised a lot of money for others. But there were a tremendous number of charity events during the year, and they were, for me, as somebody who is often quite skeptical about the impact of charities, I was very very impressed with all the hard work that goes on. And the biggest day is City Giving Day, when we're now reaching something like just under 10% of the city participates in City Giving Day in September, which is when we get out and shout out what we've been doing for charity. My only disappointment was that last year Zien won the trivia quiz evening, and then this year, in my year as Lord Mayor, you guys let me down by only coming, what was it, second or third?
Thank you very much. We're going to have to move swiftly through. Next is you're a scientist, and you brought that understanding to the role. You had real science going on in the city.
We did. The first thing kicking off the year was National Physical Laboratory lent us that little clock there, that box on the top right. And I'm standing next to a slightly older version that the NPL gave us to leave, and it stayed in Mansion House all year. So we recreated that time experiment where the two twins are moving. One's in outer space and one remains on Earth. And the one who remains on Earth ages faster. Anyway, we did it in a skyscraper, which is the first time. We had a whole bunch of vibration experiments at the monument, proving sadly it would have never worked as Wren and Hooke had imagined as an observatory. There was just too much vibration, and not just in the modern era. Those paint panels up there were great fun, something I'd always wanted to do. Thermochromic paint changes color. And this was set to change color to basically go white when it was hot and go black when it was cold. So the albedo change there meant reflectivity, and we did in fact put thermometers under it, and we could see the difference. I'd love to see the city painted up that way. We had pollinator counts, both acoustic and using apps. Uh, Fascinating study on growing seagrass down the Thames, which is working. And we also did a survey of microplastics around the coast. So a lot of things went on, and it was just great fun. But again, just trying to show the city as a place, it's doing things that matter to the world.
And then you also had fun, I'm told, during the year.
Yeah, great fun. Dear Marco Bucci, who's now the president of Liguria, was actually the mayor of Genoa and volunteered to lend us Paganini's violin. And so in October, we had this fantastic celebration. We also had 2 weeks as a festival of innovation and knowledge and music together, which was run by Ian Ritchie. But the LSO really outshone itself, and I was just, Catherine McDowell and her team really pulled out the stops. His Majesty came, and we also had raised a lot of money for the LSO that evening. I went up to view the boundary stone at Staines, which was a tradition that had been sort of lost, so we revived that. We had a Thames Day on the fourth Sunday of September, the 22nd. which is World Rivers Day, and I hope that keeps going. We had a Peeps Day during the first week in September, which was there to celebrate that great man. I'd like that to go on next year, really, so that we can eclipse Dublin and Bloomsday. Now, the tie. This was great fun. This is given to me by Irvin in America. And Irvin, thank you so much for this. He runs the Jerry Garcia tie. This is a product placement, like the Jerry Garcia tie company, which is something I've always loved. And he had this tie designed for me. So it was a great and fun year. And the experiments were just enormous fun, going up and down the monument and things like that, putting in scientific instrumentation. You couldn't have a greater time.
And of course, part of the role of the Lord Mayor is to act as ambassador for London. This is your travel program, I think, during the year. Just really wondering whether you could reflect on what you've learned, I guess, from your travels, and what it was that people wanted from you as Lord Mayor when you were traveling.
Yeah, well, the travel program is important. Firstly, in terms of quantity, there were 24 trips abroad, let alone trips within the UK. And you spent over 100 days out of the country. You travel at ministerial rank, which means you're treated quite nicely at airports. Once in a great while, you get these armed convoys, as I did in India and in Laos, quite frightening. But ultimately, the purpose of the trips is to project the city, and that's why you need to have your ducks in a row back here, the program running, and the team are really supporting it. I wanted to make a statement by pivoting a bit more towards Europe. So I did 9 European countries, as opposed to a Lord Mayor would typically do 2 or 3. And I wanted to show Europe that we were really there and connected. That turned out to be pivotal and very, very interesting, and coincided quite nicely with the government's move towards that. We visited 2 new countries. Lord Mayor had never been to Iceland or to Laos. And Laos was particularly intriguing because I met all of the 10 ASEAN countries in one go, which was there. What did I find on the trips? Well, I found a great warmth and affection towards London and the City of London everywhere. And I really do mean that. And a bit of a welcome back. We've been seen to be quite internal since the Brexit vote. We're getting to be more external and moving on. And I was very, very pleased with the receptions that I received everywhere. The subjects did vary, but we did spend a lot of time talking about the environment and sustainable finance and green. We spent a lot of time talking, obviously, about AI. And then we spent a lot on financial services regulation and trade. Those are sort of 3 dominant themes as we went round. I think it's difficult to say which trip was the best or anything. There was a very strong trip to China where we achieved actually some really good things on financial services regulation. Going to Dublin is always great fun, and that was probably the most social trip. I learned a heck of a lot in India that I didn't know. It was probably the most educational trip. So great variety there. But overall, biggest thing, coming back with the fact that the world has a deep affection for this solution center.
Super. And just I know you're one who likes to measure results, and just turning to the results that you think you've achieved during the year, what are the things you want to pick out, I guess?
Well, probably just 2. The first is I did a scorecard every other month, so there's 6, report cards up, and this is the final report card published just a month ago. And so I was quite pleased. You can see there that we were tracking very carefully all the things that were going on. The 2,500 plus attendees of the colloquies, 298 broadcasts. On speeches, we have different ways of calculating speeches, but I believe it was something close to 500 written speeches with the speechwriters, let alone all the informals, and that addressed some 70,000 people physically. Let alone the broadcast media. So it was a very, very busy bit. But I think the most interesting thing, and remember that to become Lord Mayor, you do have to be elected, and you're elected in a variety of different electorates, one by the workers and residents, one by the livery, and one by the livery and the aldermen. So you've got different constituencies to appeal to. So, like any politician, I want to lay credit for something that probably had nothing to do with me. And that's that the jobs actually increased. It's an astonishing number. We just took this survey and published it at the end of November last month. And I said at the beginning we had 615,000 workers. We now have 678,000 workers in 1 year. And most of that growth is actually in the tech sector. So it's a fascinating change. Being a statistician, yes, that is 10.4%, just to help you out. So it really is an amazing piece of growth. Am I proud of it? Well, if I can lay credit to it, I'd be enormously proud of it. But I think we should all be proud of our city and the hard work that it's doing and the success it's making by helping people solve problems.
If we move on to the next slide, I know it's a question you've been asked often, but what was the best moment in your year? I'm sure there are many of them.
Well, that's the problem, Mike. They're just far too many. Whether it's the abseiling or the riding, as I said earlier, you got the physical stuff. I had an inspection on horseback of the Honorable Artillery Company, and I was very pleased about that. The light cavalry there, who were great friends. So just a lot happening. Wonderful livery dinners. It's just, and you got up every day and you have a sheet, and it would typically have, anywhere minimum 10, but maybe as high as 18 or 19 events to go to. I changed clothes once, eight times, because you had different clothes you have to wear for different functions. So lots of things going on. I got caught out on my best moment when I was at dinner once with my family, and somebody said, "What's the best moment?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of hard. You start off on your very first full day in office with the Lord Mayor's show. So 250,000 people, television, 7,000 people participating. How could you possibly not have a great day then? That's probably the best moment of your life." And then I looked across the table and saw Elizabeth and realized that, except for my wedding, and then down at the other end of the table was my oldest daughter and my eldest daughter's birth. And then I looked at the other end of the table. There's my youngest daughter and my youngest daughter's birth. So I've come to say the best moment was the Lord Mayor's show, leaving aside all family events. So we'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much. And very quickly, what next?
Well, you and I are chatting about that, as you know. I'm looking at new challenges. Clearly, first I have an election. Aldermen put themselves up for election every 6 years. And so I put myself up for election, and that election is next Thursday, the 19th, my birthday. If any of you are interested, if you're a Broad Street voter, please turn out and vote for me. Getting back into Zien, which will be a good chunk of time. I need a holiday with Elizabeth. She's earned it. Need to see my mom. I haven't seen my mom in a year. Like to get some skiing in, like to get some sailing in, like to do a lot of other things. But what's next? Well, whatever it is, I'd like it to be solutions focused as opposed to honorary. I would like it to combine, as you said at the beginning, Mike. My career has always been science and tech, economics and finance. With the number of passports, the travel, and the languages, I would like it to be definitely international. So, what might those topics be? Well, definitely London. And there'll be an announcement in January about a new role in London with the Chamber of Commerce. Like to look at new ways of doing philanthropy. I've come away convinced over the year that the world would be a bit of a better place if we could sort out the governance of cities. I'm not alone in that. There are a number of other organizations exploring that. But I think that there's something there about how do we make cities vibrant and connected and structured within a nation state system. We seem to have lost a bit of that. May sound a bit theoretical. And then sustainable finance using markets. And there I'm having some discussions with the United Nations Development Program about things that we could do there. So a lot ahead. A lot of it to be done with Zien or by Zien, and a lot of it to take advantage of an extraordinary 4.5 years with the city.
Thank you very much. I'm going to skip over the next slide. We might come back to your advice to your older self,
Oh,
but we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'd like to get through as many of those as we can. And Michael, I'm going to ask you to be really short and snappy in your answers, just to make sure we get through as many as possible. First of all, Paul Dawson said you said that workers in the city have the vote. How many workers actually have the vote in the city? Is his question.
Well, Paul, it's a good question. It's a complicated franchise. So out of the 678,000, first they've got to register to vote. And then of those that register to vote, they come on a 1 for 10 basis in the corporate. So it is a complicated franchise. So out of the 678,000, technically about 68,000 could have the vote if they register for it. In truth, we've got registration rates, I think, around half of that, and then we do actually have pretty good participation. Aldermanic elections lately have been well over 40% of voting. And then we have 8,000 residents, and the 8,000 residents also vote and vote very strongly. So it's a good participation, but it could be better. And we've been having debates about what to do about the workers' franchise. I personally would like to just say, make it more simple, perhaps give every worker the vote, but then that would have to be balanced against the needs of the residents, and that is going to be a long haul there. But there is discussion about it, and I'm happy to engage.
Hugh Persis, he commented you emphasised multidisciplinary work, but can you touch on multiculturalism and how that's evolved and influenced the city?
Well, I think the city has always demonstrated a multicultural aspect. I mean, as I have said, I think it was in 1190 we threw out the Jews, and that was a bad mistake. We had to rename Lombard Street, to bring the Italians in from Lombardia. Uh, so the city learned its lesson, and whether you go to the Huguenots or the return of the Jewish community, etc., it's always been a multicultural place, and it exists within London, which itself is horrifically multicultural. So I think we demonstrate that. I said earlier, some 300 languages are spoken in the city. I think 40% of city people were born abroad. So it's an extraordinarily multicultural place. The question is, how do we use that? And I think London has been celebrated around the world. Just look in films and things. Our projection is that of multiculturalism, and I think we're largely achieving it. It can always be improved, but when you look at London compared to other multicultural centers, the tensions are not there in the same way. They are not. They're certainly a lot less about ethnicity, etc. It's more about income and status than anything else. But there is always more work to do, and I don't deny it.
Trevor Hilder's just interested in, as someone from the US, what made you choose a career in London instead of New York or somewhere else?
Well, I think in a way that's related to Hugh's question. What other city would have somebody like me as a foreigner be allowed to come up and be Lord Mayor? And with my accent, no less, which I failed to lose in 40 plus years of living in London. I chose London because it was multicultural and meritocratic, in my opinion. I also chose it for travel purposes and connectivity. Londoners are more connected. The conversations you have in London are not the conversations you will have in Houston, and I really enjoy that.
Dan Feeney's asked, going forward, does London need more legislative certainty, regulatory clarity, or startup mentality, especially given the last few years of turbulence across the UK and further afield?
And you wanted short, snappy answers, Mike. Well, anyway,
we still hold you to that. You can have a separate conversation with Dan outside here.
I probably should. I would say that the one thing that all nations need, particularly after this year of elections and all that, we do need to find ways of ensuring that we have certainty in the sense that business people want it. And there's a bit of a disjoint between what politicians say and what business people say. Business people do not want certainty. If you think about it, you wouldn't have a market because you'd know what the price should be. What we want is we want certainty about how the rules of the game will change. And so the capriciousness of government is a bit of a problem. And we've seen how beneficial it is in the UK just in the last year and a bit since we've stopped some of the Punch and Judy stuff at Westminster and started to focus on just getting things done. It makes a huge difference to business and your perception around the world. Now, that is one opportunity for me simply to plug sovereign sustainability linked bonds, which we at Zien have been pushing for many years and quite successfully. We helped Chile in March 22 issue the first one in the world. And in fact, just last week, we had nothing to do with it, but Thailand issued one as well. And these are bonds which basically pin the government on its policy. on climate change. So if the government fails to meet its targets, the interest rate rises, and if they do meet their targets, they get a bond at a slightly cheaper rate, which is fine. And that's what business people need, is ways of ensuring that the government can make and hold to long-term decisions. And I'd love to explore that more.
Thank you very much. Chris David's asked about our own national politicians' perception of the city, and is that moving in the right direction?
Sorry, Mike, I just missed that. National politicians.
National politicians and how they perceive the city.
That's been a very hard dial to move. As you're aware, national politicians are very inward facing. I was just having a discussion last night about, automobile policy, and it's dictated by people like me who live in London without a car, and forget that there's actually a great countryside out there, people who need a car, full stop. So it's that kind of thing with national politicians and with us here in the city. Has the perception changed? I don't think it's changed very much. It was probably easier for me to change the perception of people abroad in Tokyo or something on what the city stands for. Westminster we have a very over centralized national economy, and the city is outstanding in being arguably one of the few functioning bits of local government within England, anyway. So there's a lot of more work that needs to be done. What I would hope over time, though, and this is the message, is that national politicians begin to see that by releasing some of the local vibrancy, everybody benefits, so that we can make better connections that way as well.
And Graham Elliott extends that, I think. He's asked about London's connectivity facing outwards from the UK as one thing, but how well integrated is London with the rest of the UK, and is that separateness from the rest of the UK a long-term problem for London as well as for the rest of the country?
Well, you can't change the geography and the demographics. So London has always been separate. There's the English UK issue, but London has always been a separate entity since the dawn of time. It's always been about 20 to 25% of GDP. So you're always going to see this. Well, there's this big smoke up there now. And just look at a map of Europe. London is 4 times the size of any other city in Europe. Berlin, I think, comes close, and Paris, but we are the big beast. It's not an unusual size city if you're in China or India, but it's a very unusual size city within Europe. So it's always going to have tensions there, and those go up and down as things ebb and flow. We, the city, though, are very concerned about that and have been for a very long time. So we deliberately make treks abroad. So I made a point of visiting the Channel Islands because each Lord Mayor normally gets a trip to their home, and I don't have one. So I thought I'd bring in the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, which I did. Went up to Sheffield, went up to Edinburgh. So we do make those trips as Lord Mayor. But the corporation, another level down, is always trying to involve other regions and other cities in everything that it does. But ultimately, if you're a city outside or a town or whatever outside of London, you'll go and say, well, they've got all the money and the wealth and they're bigger than we are. Why do they have it all? It's not quite true, but it's how there's that feeling out there. And that's something we're going to have to work on unless we level the geography out.
Thanks very much. And Tony Craddock refers to the community of the City of London, but it just notes that a lot of online meetings, communing is more difficult. And what's the future there? And a linked question, I guess, is from Ed Atta Grant, just asking, what's the future of office space in the city? How is that shifting?
Well, we're still adjusting to the change of use, and I happen to think it's a good adjustment. Things like this, for example, this webinar. What we're seeing is that we've got almost guaranteed we will only be at 80% of pre-COVID levels, but that presents us with a lot of opportunity, and the opportunity, I think, is to reimagine our urban realm to increase the connectivity that Tony's referring to. So, for example, in the corporation, we have a program around what I term groundage. It was created by a predecessor of mine who sadly passed away, Mike. But he actually created this idea of, can we have permeability in the city? And that takes a long time, but you can now see it. If you look at Bloomberg Center, was the first building done that way, I think 9 years ago. 22 Bishopsgate, 100 Bishopsgate. I mean, you go around, you begin to realize we're trying to create that more and more opportunities to interconnect. That's in line, of course, with some of the changes at Canary Wharf, where people are moving here, and Canary Wharf is experimenting in other ways. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do with that extra 20%, if I can make it as simply as that. There are a number of other things. I'm expecting to see many multi-use spaces. I think there's an opportunity to create a better intellectual life in the city. Perhaps all of those learned societies I spoke about might have a common museum where they present their wares. We've got the new London Museum coming online in, I think, in 18 months. So just a lot of things happening, and we are definitely reimagining it. But we need help. We need people to come up with more and more ideas in that area. I'm quite excited about it, in all honesty. I think we can have more efficient cities, which will help the planet, make it more interesting for us, and give us better lifestyles if we just really work on that infrastructure.
But Michael, just wondering, have you got 5 more minutes? It's only we do have quite a few questions still to touch on, and if you have the time, I'd just like to extend 5 minutes if we can. And apologies to anyone in the audience who has to get away, but a reminder that the session is filmed, so if you want to catch up with things you miss at the end, there's an opportunity. Peter Cousins has asked about the question of London having a great science base, great startup tech, biotech, and pharma companies. But when they need to go public, they go to the US. Does the decline of the stock exchange in London, does it matter?
It clearly does matter, and it matters for the same reason that it matters to have a winning football team in your city. If you're going to have a stadium and it's going to be full, you don't want it. You want it to be successful. I believe that the difficulty is slightly misanalyzed. It's not about the listings or the scaling up or the money. It's actually about where the jobs are located. If somebody wants from abroad to pay you to do interesting, good work, well, do you care what the source of the money is? I'm beginning to sound like Vespasian, pecuniam non olet, money doesn't smell. So that to me is the focal point. And we do have a problem with scaling up. And I think some of that problem, if one is candid, is the percentage of GDP taken by the government, which leads to difficulties when you're scaling up a large plant. You want to go someplace where you're going to get the returns. And a large plant is not movable. So it's not surprising we see in a bright, intellectual, multicultural, multidisciplinary city a lot of startups, a lot of bright startups, but when it comes time to locate heavy plant, they need to think about where that is. And so, whilst the current government is focused on growth, and I think that's a really good program, please don't get me wrong, I do think we need also to think about efficiency. And that efficiency will translate into either better infrastructure or reduced percentage taken by government, or ideally both. But you have these choices as you look around the world. You'll see some centers such as Singapore with, I think it's 18% of GDP taken by tax against 44% here. And these are some of the deeper issues about scaling up. When it comes to the exchange, it's a private business. And I will give it a bit of slack, principally because listed equities around the world are having problems. Yes, we are losing some of these IPOs recently, and it's a bit of a bad run. But ultimately, all the exchanges around the world are having difficulty attracting people to list. And that's because, one, listings aren't providing money as cheaply as they used to against private equity and other sources of funding. And secondly, becoming a listed company these days is a hassle, a big hassle. You've got a whole bunch of reporting that nobody actually reads, but all the ESG reporting, you've got quarterly statements when people give it to you in the neck because you didn't do as well as they thought. So if you're a CFO of a major corporate, listing these days is a big decision, and one that's going to cause you a lot of sleepless nights. And for what? So we need to make that more attractive. And that's not just the London Stock Exchange's problem.
I'm going to get one last question. We have some which we haven't got to, but I'll pass on details of those questions to you afterwards, Michael, so you can be in contact. But Amy Green's asked, is a year long enough to do the job of being a Lord Mayor, in your view?
Well, I've often critiqued how much of life revolves around the sun. We have annual accounts, we have annual Lord Mayors. It's something magical. It's the astrology of circling or orbiting the sun. So why a year? Well, it's a good period, actually. I think it's just right. And that sounds crazy, but remember that when you're elected Lord Mayor, you go into office on your own. You don't come with 75 cronies from your party. The second thing is you knew typically about a year out you were going to get it, so you have time to plan it. Um, you don't spend your time thinking about when I do this again next year because you can't. So you try and get everything right the first time, which really puts the pressure on you. But it's good. You don't sit there taking notes. Next time I give a speech at the annual whatever, I'll do this or that. You can add notes to your successor. That's a different thing entirely. Um, and I guess the biggest thing of all is you get to be yourself because you're not up for reelection. I don't have to think what does Mike want to hear to re-elect me. I can actually tell Mike what I think, and if he doesn't like me, on average, I've only got 6 months in office anyway, so I'll be gone before it's over. So it gives a lot of commitment, a lot of dedication. Also, if I can say so, physically, it is extremely demanding. And the current Lord Mayor, Alistair King, has hit it with a vengeance, and he too will feel like I do. I'm sure in 11 months he'll just want to get that break. Now, when you stick around for the city, it's not our Rolodex to take away after all that travel. It's the city's, and I hope to continue to do stuff. But I think you can only pace yourself for a single year at that level of intensity.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. As I say, we will make sure that Michael has a list of the questions which we haven't quite got to, and so he can respond outside this forum. But just to say, we have some good events coming forward still. Two more just to draw your attention to for this year. Tomorrow, Fixing the Crises in Capitalism and Democracy. And then the ESOP SOFA 2024 review, Budget and Pisces, on the 18th. And moving into the new year, we'll have an update on EU financial services legislation and initiatives as we move into 2025. I had a lot of people giving us applause and hand claps on the system. Jonathan Poyner particularly asked that we pass on his thanks. Trevor Hilder has commented thank you. So a lot of thanks to add to mine, Michael, for your session this morning. Thank you to the audience as well for your questions, your engagement, and we'll see you all again very soon. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, and I hope to be chairing some more of these webinars myself now that I'm back. Great to see everybody, and really appreciate your support this year. My sincere thanks to everyone who made this year possible.